Turn in your Bible to Psalms chapter 71, and we want to continue our series, Greater Than. And tonight we want to talk about our confusion. Anybody been confused in your life? A few hands went up. How does today's church or Christian deal with so many different confusing issues facing the planet? I remember watching a program on a famine in the Sudan, where they centered upon one mother. And they were describing the difficulties that this mother had in gathering enough food for the one meal of the day. I think she had 4 or 5 children. I don't remember what it was. Her husband was no longer alive because rebel troops had come into their village and killed a number of their members of their village. And I sat there, and I don't think in my life I have ever felt more vulnerable. I mean, and I don't know how many times I've watched, whatever it might be, when they're describing famines, and watched people as they try and figure out how they're going to cope with just getting enough meal. But this one, I've never had this feeling before in my life. I was stunned by how vulnerable I felt. And the thought that was coursing, there were actually 2 thoughts that were coursing through my mind. The first one was this: why is my life so good? Why is it that I can go right in here and can overeat? As a matter of fact, I could go out and afford the best steak in town if I wanted to. Which is not a bad idea, is it? And then all of a sudden, it's like, why doesn't she live here and I live there? And I can't describe you what I felt when I saw what I saw in that. And the second thought that really ran through my mind was, well, God, why don't you intervene and do something? Because here's a mother that loves her children as much as any other mother in the world. And yet she's put in a set of circumstances where she can't do anything about it. Did I win the lottery in heaven one day? Did you win the lottery because we get to live in this place called the United States of America? And she didn't? I don't know about you, but things like that just really kind of confuse me. And I wonder why I've landed in the spot that I've landed in. When we look at the AIDS epidemic in Africa and watch as millions are being infected with death, it's confusing. I have a friend of mine that shared this story with me, and I can't tell you his name or he'd kill me. But he's been able to sit in some pretty high meetings with government officials from different countries in Africa. And they're trying to confront this issue of what do we do with the orphans? What do we do with the AIDS epidemic? And if you've ever seen the statistics on this, it is nightmarish, to say the least. It is very, very hard to deal with what you see going on the planet. What had happened in this meeting is a German company had come up with a vaccine that was able to vaccinate the mother just hours before she was to give birth, because AIDS is still transmitted through the birth canal. And they could stop the prevention of AIDS being passed on to this next generation. And that would not cost them anything. And the German company was happy to pass on this vaccine. As he listened with great intent, all the countries in Africa that were represented there turned the vaccine down. And the reason why was, we don't know what we do with the orphans. I mean, it just shakes you that those kind of decisions are being made in the world today. I don't know about you, but I get confused. I don't understand that stuff. Another source was telling me here not too long ago that for the known drinking water problem in the world today, for us or anybody else to go in and fix it. You know how much it would take? $20 billion. $20 billion. With Gates and Buffett, what they've contributed, with their funding, could more than take care of the world's drinking problem, of the ones that we know about in the world today. You know what the biggest problem is? The delivery system. The delivery system is because if you started giving the money away to certain different countries to fix this, they would gobble it up or not even let it in. Here's a startling statistic that goes right behind that. Do you know how much we've spent? And this is not a political statement at all. But do you know how much we've spent on the Iraqi war? $600 billion. $600 billion. See, all I'm trying to do is to elevate in your mind and to bring to mind that there's really confusing issues in the world today as we sit here as Christians. And we haven't even dealt with the personal issues of finance, disease, death, and relational problems. They're so confusing at times. We're going to read about David, and David is going to share some of his wisdom of how he dealt with confusion when matters of this magnitude confronted him. We're not talking about a young man, but we're hearing words from a seasoned veteran who has observed the ups and downs of life. Sometimes we really take shots at the older generation. So I am too. Listen to this. Old age is when you sink your teeth into a big, juicy steak and it stays there. Old age is when your dreams are reruns. Old age is when you sit in the rocking chair and you can't get it started. There's something for us to learn from the older generation when we encounter confusing times. And David is at the point in his life where he wants to start sharing some of his wisdom that he's gathered through the years. Then we need to learn from the younger generation who sees the world through much different worldview or eyes than we do. David became an answer for Israel when they were living in some difficult and confusing times. I want you to read this along with me. Don't read it out loud, but just read along with me in Psalm 71, because David is talking about some real big issues that were going on in his life. And now he's looking back and reflecting upon it. Verse 1, "In you, O Lord, have I taken refuge. Let me not be put to shame. Rescue me and deliver me in your righteousness. Turn your ear to me and save me. Be my rock of refuge, to which I can always go. Give the command to save me, for you are my rock and my fortress. Deliver me, O my God, from the hand," now notice this, "of the wicked, from the grasp of evil and cruel men." He was confronting those kind of issues. "For you have been my hope, O sovereign Lord, my confidence since my youth. From birth I've relied on you. You brought me from my mother's womb. I will ever praise you. I have become like a portent to many, but you are my strong refuge. My mouth is filled with your praise, declaring your splendor all day long. Do not cast me away when I am old. Do not forsake me when my strength is gone." If you'd like to take a look, you can pull out your outlines and let's look at some ways to deal with confusion. Number one is this: seek out the wisdom of older generations. Verse 18 of that same chapter says this: "Even when I am old and gray, do not forsake me, my God." At this juncture of old age, David sees the need to tell his story to a new generation. Now let me just talk about this here for a little while, about stories. It seems to be that there is a lot of truth that is related through a story. As a matter of fact, I've been speaking publicly long enough now to know that if I can get away from a text and begin to tell you a story, you can immediately watch the attention rate go up with people that are listening. Why is that? Telling stories, and by the way, this is one of the favorite ways that Jesus communicated truth. He was a master storyteller. But it's kind of like people. When you're young, you have all these theories about life, And then you start really participating in life, and these experiences start to teach you a few things. That maybe your theories were not as correct as you thought. And then when you get to an older age, you look back and you realize that life has really dealt you some blows, and there's some wisdom that goes along with that. So it's like over the aging process, you begin to realize that there are some things that are beat into you, if you want to call it that, or developed in you as you walk through life. And I've just watched this. I mean, I've just noticed this with people. I've noticed this with my son, and I've noticed it with other people that are younger. That lots of times and there's something that happens with an individual when they connect with somebody that's older. There's just something that happens. And I've watched this take place as somebody really connects and you start to listen to their stories. I have some friends here tonight that their dad and husband was that to me, Alva Roper. Never been around a guy that could tell a story like this guy. And as he began to tell a story, I just found myself almost being mesmerized because of how he would tell a story. One of the things that I always regretted about not spending more time with Alva was that I needed to write down all of his little sayings. He could just crack you up, you know. I asked him one day, I said, I hope I can remember this. How you doing, Alva? And he says, I'm so low today, I could ride on a bicycle with a 10-gallon hat underneath a snake and never touch its belly. And it just came out like that, and I want to write this down, you know. It's one of those things. But you realize what happens, that when people have experienced life, and David, and notice this, friends, we are gaining tonight, experiencing how David dealt with life simply because he shared his experience in a story form. As a matter of fact, it's made me question the way that I teach. 5 points. It kind of gives you the idea that if I go home and do these 5 points, then all the world is going to untangle, and so therefore I'm going to have understanding, and all of us know that that's not true. But it's the Western way of how we teach. And yet it seems to be that when we come around to the Scriptures, there is a fundamental way of just reading the Scripture and understanding that it's in a story form. And there is something that is so pragmatic about that we begin to pick up inferences and truths and values and things that we don't get any other way. Tom Brokaw, who was the NBC guy, on the 50th anniversary of Normandy, the invasion of Normandy, went over to do his thing. And while he was there, he said, I was sitting in a pub with a bunch of these guys that were at Normandy. And he said, I was so captivated by their stories that was the catalyst that launched me to begin to write this book on the greatest generation ever. Is because of the stories that were coming out. And I'm just saying to you this, that when there's confusing times in your life, maybe it'd be a good idea to seek out somebody that's got a little gray hair. Because what they'll relate to you is a story of how they went through hard times. Nobody has it easy. And you realize that they found ways to navigate through their life. So confusing times. Find somebody that's a little bit older. Number 2 is this. Remember, younger generations initiate change. Oh boy, do they. Verse 6, from birth I have relied upon you. You brought me from my mother's womb. I will ever praise you. When a younger generation is around, they always bring energy and enthusiasm to the environment. You know, one of the things I love about working around here is because we have so many young people like Nate. You know, Nate is always, and there's just a group of them. And they go around, they slug people walking down the halls. They don't slug me because they know I'd break. But they're going out to coffee. They're going to Starbucks, and they get a van, and they all run over to Starbucks. They invited me. They do it every Thursday afternoon, but they knew I would never remember, so it was safe. They invited me and made me feel good. But, they've always got things going on. And there is something about youthful enthusiasm and optimism that translates into faith. that says we can get this thing done. Now, I want you to look at David, because David was presented with a problem that an older generation could not handle. And his name was Goliath. And you see a whole generation that is absolutely terrified by this giant. And David comes in and he goes, who is this uncircumcised Philistine that thinks he can taunt the armies of the living God? I'll take him down. And everybody, you know what the older generation says? You can't do that. I mean, he presents a whole new paradigm to the problem that is presented to the world or to that nation at that time. And he comes in, and all of us know he slays Goliath. And everybody goes, wow, this kid's got it. You know? Well, that's exactly how God answers a lot of problems that comes on the world today, is that these kids that are being raised today see the world in a different paradigm than you and I do, and they don't see it as overwhelming, which happens with age. It just happens. You know, getting out of bed sometimes seems overwhelming to older people. You know, but younger people just have this enthusiasm. I want to tell you two examples, and I'll give you two more after that. A guy by the name of Lauren Cunningham, somebody that actually is a personal friend of mine. When he was 19 or 20 years old, God gave him a vision of waves crashing in upon the shores of every continent in the world. And he said, as I watched this vision, those waves turned to young people. And he knew that God was calling him to send forth armies of young people on the world through missions. And Youth with a Mission was birthed or born. Because a young man had a vision in saying, the world can be changed through young people. And friends, hundreds of thousands, if it's not through YWAM, but other organizations like that now, are affecting the world through change simply because one man had a vision of saying, no, this can be done. Had to fight a lot of the tradition about who could be a missionary. But incredible things took place. Another guy, Bill Hybels, got tired of church and just said, we gotta have a church for unchurched people. And has played plenty of you know what for his vision. But the seeker-sensitive church was birthed, and millions of people have been swept into the kingdom because one young man said, can't live this way. We got two young guys. They're going to be world changers. I want you to listen to their testimony. What we've been talking about is confusion. And we've kind of been setting the stage as though the older generation has answers, and then God always has answers through the new generation that's emerging.